you had a great weekend, folks. Really hope you did. Was thinking about you all weekend long. Always do. Always think about the people of America and the people who comprise this, the largest audience for a radio talk show in the United States. It's known as the Rush Limbaugh program. I, of course, am Rush Limbaugh, your fully licensed radio talk show host, and as well, highly trained, years of experience forming, shaping, and molding me into a class act. 1-800-282-2882 if you'd like to be on the program today. A lot going on. We're going to review some of the most incredible comments on the Sunday programs yesterday. Senator Kennedy is on a rampage again. It is almost as though Robert Bork has been nominated to the Supreme Court again. I mean, Kennedy is just on a tear. Also, the Reverend Jackson yesterday was on the This Week show. It's ABC's Sunday show. Kennedy was on Meet the Depressed. And George Will sort of sliced up the Reverend Jackson. Before we get into, and there's a lot of humorous, lighthearted stuff out there as well, as befits the holidays. In fact, did any of you yesterday watch the Sunday shows? If you did, you might have gotten the idea that it's a slow news day out there because of all of the discussion topics that occurred during the roundtables. I am particularly drawn to the This Week roundtable, where they had an in-depth discussion of SUVs. You know, every time this subject comes up, I wonder how many of you who watch it say, you know, Rush warned us about this attack on SUVs, and now it's made NBC Nightly News, and yesterday on the This Week roundtable it occurred again, and it became known that Cokie Roberts detests light trucks and SUVs. The reason is that when she's driving behind one, she can't see anything else. She thinks that it's just a bunch of guys wanting to be macho driving these trucks around. I was watching this in somewhat of a state of amazement, because if you do the research, as of course I, my friends, have done, you find that SUVs are most popular among women. It is women who love these things, especially petite women who love getting in those cockpits high above everybody else, being able to look down on the traffic and be above it. It's the feeling of power that they get on occasion. And I think that it's a bit of a misnomer to chalk this off to men. But anyway, the whole topic of SUVs is being discussed. And it is being, now they're now being criticized, and it's amazing because of how popular these things are. And in relationship to that, we've got news that there was 10 inches of snow in parts of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama last night. There's also, I heard early today, a report that it snowed in Guadalajara, Mexico for the first time in 100 years. And we just finished a global warming conference in Kyoto, Japan, where no doubt the participants will attempt to portray this as a phenomenon of global warming. They'll have no choice. But then, of course, others with common sense are going to have to realize that that's just flailing away. Do you remember back, ladies and gentlemen, to the summer of, what would it have been, 1993? When was the White House Magic Bus Tour? Anybody remember? It had to be 90, maybe it was 94. It was 93 was when the healthcare thing came up. Anyway, they had this massive bus tour from West Coast to East Coast to try to drum up support for the President's and First Lady's National Health Care Initiative. Of course, we tracked, ladies and gentlemen, the success and or failure of this bus tour. It turned out to be a total bomb. Little did we know, although we suspected, little did we know during this period that the White House had workers from the Democratic National Committee come over to the White House and do political work monitoring the reporting of this bus tour, and in particular me and you. It is in the Washington Times today. This, just to take you back to the archives, this was our theme song every day as we chronicled that bus tour. We called it the bogus bus tour, and here's the song.
They're on a bus trying to sell their plan. Get off this bogus bus. But they don't have one you can understand. Get off this bogus bus. They're changing their plan at every stop. Get off this bogus bus. Every day there's a new flip-flop. Get off this bogus bus. Healthcare's fine without the feds. Get off this bogus bus. We just don't care for VA beds. Get off this bogus bus. They think the bus will divert the press. Get off this bogus bus. While Congress is here in their whitewater mess. Get off this bogus bus. They're taking our country for a ride. Get off this bogus bus. Don't want our healthcare socialized. Get off this bogus bus. Don't want it, 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 don't want it. They say they're on the road to cure our ills. Get off this bogus bus. But they're just rambling down a campaign trail. Get off this bogus bus. Their bus broke down along the street. Get off this bogus bus. Why don't they get it fixed before they work on me? Get off this bogus bus. Get me off this bogus bus. Get off this bogus bus. With my health, you're the last I trust. Get off this bogus bus. 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 Yeah, bogus bus. Bogus bus. Get off the bogus bus. Get off the bogus bus. Get off the
Get off that bogus bus. Now, if you'll recall, ladies and gentlemen, this bus tour was a total flop. It ended up being so bad that people had to, that were part of the bus tour, had to schedule meetings in places other than where they had originally been scheduled, in city to city, and they did it in private. These things were supposed to be open to the public. They're supposed to generate huge support, but it didn't work out that way. Well, the Washington Times has a story today, friends, which means you won't see it anywhere else in the mainstream press, because the mainstream press thinks the Washington Times is biased. Anyway, the story is this. White House volunteers, by the way, this is a violation of the law, but we don't care about that in America anymore. White House volunteers paid by the Democratic Party used their posts to engage in political and fundraising activities in possible violation of rules set by President Clinton's own White House counsel, Abner Mikva. All this according to internal documents obtained to the Washington Times, and I myself, my friends, have those internal documents, and they are indeed official White House documents. I have them right here in my formerly nicotine-stained fingers. These Democratic National Committee volunteers, or workers actually, these are White House volunteers that were paid to the DNC, assigned to the White House, also charted the success of foes of First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton's health care campaign, including Rush Limbaugh ditto head backers, advised the Oval Office on how to handle a banana lobbyist, and ordered the Vice President's office to write follow-up notes to donors that he met at controversial White House coffees. Now, you remember that Ab Mikva issued a 9-page memo in '94 which prohibited White House workers from using government resources for campaigning or fundraising. And that's why there's a possible violation. I'm not talking about this from the possible violation. I don't really, that's a dead duck anyway. That horse isn't going to fly, that dog isn't going to fly, whatever the phrase is, because nobody cares about that. But I find it interesting that they had these people chronicling us, you and me, as we were reporting on their bogus bus tour. The volunteer that charted you people is named Maureen Atta. And according to the Washington Times, and of course, I've got her memo right here. It's a memorandum for Tom Epstein from Maureen regarding the First Lady's visit to Washington and Oregon. Ms. Atta wrote in a July 25, 1994 memo that there was a poor showing at the Ditto Head rally held Thursday night in preparation for Friday's Health Security Express event. That was the bus tour, the Health Security Express. She also noted that on the day of the Oregon Bus Express kickoff, protesters almost equaled those of Clinton supporters. Almost. We had them outnumbered. We had them outnumbered everywhere that bus tour went. She added that in Seattle, a day later, the public health care event was all but a total disaster on Saturday. A large group of vocal protesters gathered, blowing whistles and booing the First Lady throughout the rally. The protesters, who seemed to outnumber supporters, happened to be located directly behind the press and therefore received a greater amount of coverage than their presence warranted. So they were keeping track of us in the White House. And they've always tried to say that they never did that and that this show is inconsequential. In fact, I assume that I am just one of the many mosquitoes that the president decides to swap away or swipe at on a daily basis. That is in reference to the president in a bitter speech to old Arkansas pals unloaded Saturday night on Republican critics. Didn't name anybody. Well, he did name Quayle and Ken Starr. He did mention those two names, repeatedly referring to Republicans as mosquitoes. Clinton told his old Arkansas buddies, how do you put up with mosquitoes in summertime in Arkansas? You just swat them and go on. It's a part of living. I thought the mosquito was the national bird in Arkansas. Quoting a friend, Clinton declared sooner or later some of those people, some of those mosquitoes that are trying to tear your guts out and lying about our state are going to have to fess up and admit it. Get over it. The country's in better shape. This is working. Now, he rarely does this in public. He rarely shows his anger in public. But he does in private. And it's interesting to know that all this stuff bothers him like this because he tries to create the impression just the opposite of that it doesn't bother him in any way, shape, matter, or form. Let's take a break here. We'll come back with some of a review of the Sunday shows, the other news going on out there, plus your phone calls all coming up right after this, my friends. Do not go away.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Phone number 1-800-282-2882. The big news in Washington today, the recess appointment of Bill Lan Lee to be the head of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. You know, I don't know how many of you saw Washington Week in Review on PBS Friday night, but they unearthed an interesting story. 15 years ago, Hillary Rodham, a woman named Hillary Rodham, at least that's the name she used 15 years ago, went to court charging that temporary appointments made by the president when Congress is not in session are unconstitutional. Mrs. Clinton's lawsuit was filed after President Reagan fired her and 9 other directors on the board of the Legal Services Corporation, which was a federal agency that provides legal services to the poor, as you know. President then made recess appointments to replace the ousted legal services officials. But Ms. Rodham, in the lawsuit, and her colleagues argued that President Reagan abused his constitutional powers by making recess appointments. A federal judge rejected her complaint. The judge's ruling was appealed, but by the time the case reached an appellate court, the case was moot since the Senate already had confirmed replacements for Mrs. Clinton and other former legal services directors. So what we know here is that Mrs. Clinton opposes recess appointments, or it did at one time when she got axed in order for some to be made. But we also now know, because of her lawsuit, that recess appointments are constitutional. And there was never any doubt that they're constitutional anyway. The subject came up yesterday on Meet the Press. Senator Kennedy, making his 14th appearance on Meet the Press since 1962, was asked the following question by Russert. He to the nomination of Bill Lan Lee to be Assistant Attorney General of Civil Rights. President Clinton's considering a recess appointment or making him acting Assistant Attorney General. What should he do?
Bill Lan Lee is extraordinarily well qualified to lead the Civil Rights Division. His whole life has been living and breathing civil rights and knocking down the walls of discrimination. I think it's unfortunate that we have an outstanding Asian American recommended for this position, and that the majority Republican Party, which is basically anti-civil rights, anti-immigrant, anti-women, anti-worker, are utilizing the procedures of the United States Senate to block an outstanding individual from serving all Americans. Every day that goes by, Americans suffer.
How many of you people are suffering out there because there is nobody heading up the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department? According to Senator Kennedy, a lot of you are suffering. I don't see a lot of suffering because of this. I don't hear a lot of suffering. I haven't seen any protest rallies or marches. I haven't seen any tears. I haven't seen any wailing people like we saw during the government shutdown. I remember CNN went out, found all sorts of people worried they wouldn't get a Thanksgiving turkey, wouldn't get any Christmas presents because the government was shut down, and what were they going to do? Oh, woe was them. I haven't seen any of that with Bill Lan Lee. And how about this business of the majority Republican Party was basically anti-civil rights, anti-immigrant, anti-women, anti-worker? Is this a little hysterical? Is this a little mean-spirited on the part of Senator Kennedy? It's just like Robert Bork all over again with Kennedy's diatribe when Bork was nominated to be a justice on the Supreme Court. Here is more from Senator Kennedy on Bill Lan Lee.
Bill Lan Lee is being treated harshly. And I think that the fact that he's an Asian American, an outstanding one for this position, I think it is absolutely unconscionable that the Republicans are treating him that way.
Bill Lan Lee didn't answer the questions properly. He didn't indicate that he would enforce the law. That is the law of the land today, the Constitution, when it came to certain things. He indicated that and in some instances, he didn't know the law. And so the vote was what it was, and he didn't pass. Now, I think the president is going to go ahead and make this recess appointment. And the reason the president will do it is to be able to point fingers at the Republicans and continue this diatribe of Senator Kennedy's, because he's got this race commission out there, and he's got this race initiative that he is attempting to foment and give life to, and this will feed into that by pointing out that the Republicans don't like the guy simply because he's an Asian American. There's no basis, in fact, for that. There's no evidence of it. It simply isn't the case. It's just a case that the Republicans have decided on the substance of it, that he's not qualified for this position. He's a qualified individual and all, but for this position, not. Now, Arlen Specter is one of the Republicans, I think the only Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee who's voted for Bill Lan Lee. I remember Senator Specter saying that if this nomination didn't go through, that this is going to come up in the presidential race in the year 2000. This is going to come back to bite Republicans. And he didn't think that it was worth that. He didn't think having Bill Lan Lee as head of the Civil Rights Division or denying him that post was worth the scandalous, scurrilous attacks on Republicans that will be made, such as this attack by Senator Kennedy. The Reverend Jackson was on This Week. He was asked by Sam Donaldson how he would feel if the president did appoint Lee in a recess manner. And here's what the Reverend Jackson said. Go ahead, it's cut 3. It's very short, but go ahead and listen to it.
I think it would be a sound thing. It shows President Clinton's courage and character.
There you have it. So it will show the president's courage and the president's character. We have more from the Reverend Jackson and an interchange he had with George Will. We'll not have time for that before the break coming up here in just a second. But we will get to that shortly after the break at the bottom of the hour. A number of things the Republicans can do about this if they choose to. But it appears likely that it'll happen. What's the president got to lose? I mean, he's in his lame duck presidency. He's got this race commission that he's trying to give a little life to, and this just feeds right into it. Now, I'm not saying the president doesn't think the guy's qualified. I think the president probably thinks he's perfect for what this president views civil rights to be. That definition, though, is changing, and I think that it needs to be triumphed or shouted from the mountaintops that civil rights today, in too many people's minds, means racial preferences. That's all this is about, and finding a way to get around all this anti-affirmative action that exists out there. We'll be back in a moment. We're back. Rush Limbaugh serving humanity as the all-knowing, all-caring, all-concerned, all-loving, all-understanding, all-compassionate, all-sensitive, all-everything Maharishi. Before we go to your phone calls, let's wrap it up here with the Reverend Jackson and George Will yesterday on ABC's This Week. The Reverend was asked by Mr. Will if he was correct in hearing the Reverend say at one point that if Bill Lan Lee were not to be nominated, that it would be considered a hate crime.
No, I simply said that exclusion is a form of violence and meanness and is hateful.
What is this? Exclusion is a form of violence and meanness and is hate. What is this exclusion? You know, folks, this is nothing new. I'm sound like a broken record here, but I really am getting tired of the notion here that just because, I mean, I'm a conservative, and people say that all of us conservatives are racist, that we look at people and we don't see anything but either their physical characteristics or the color of their skin or what have you. And it's the other way around. It's the left that can't avoid looking at people and seeing a label, for crying out loud, and here's proof of it. The Reverend Jackson is trying to say that if Bill Lan Lee doesn't make it, that all Asian Americans have just been dealt a double whammy. They're being excluded. Since when did we get to the point that only Asian Americans can represent the interests of Asian Americans, and only blacks can represent the interests of blacks, and only women can represent the interests of women, and whites can't represent the interests of anybody? I mean, when did we get to this point? Liberals brought us to this point. And as they're doing it, they point the finger of blame at other people. But there isn't one person in that Senate committee who's got anything against Bill Lan Lee being an Asian American. I don't think there's anybody in that committee that even looks at him as an Asian American in a way that is substantive. It's the liberals that do that. They think he's qualified simply because of that, because there never has been an Asian American heading up the Justice Department of the Civil Rights, or the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, and that alone qualifies him. Because it'll make a new statement about the evolution of America as some sort of a tolerant nation. And throughout all of this, trying to find the best people to fill the job has been subordinated to all these silly little social and surface concerns. And there's the Reverend Jackson out there now attaching such words as hateful and violence to this, while at the same time not referring to Latrell Sprewell in the same way. Next up, George Will brought up the Robert Bork situation, asks the Reverend Jackson if he opposed Bork simply on ideological grounds.
It was more than ideology. I mean, I took a very strong political position against...
Was he qualified?
Indeed, he was qualified. And Bill Lan Lee is qualified. And eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, leave all of us blind and disfigured. We must grow beyond that.
Are you apologizing to Bob Bork for opposing him?
Oh, I am not. It was not my choice to make.
Gobbledygook, sheer gobbledygook. I mean, here's the Reverend Jackson condemning an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, when in essence, and accusing people for engaging in this sort of thing with Bill Lan Lee. That was good. Will caught him on that. No question about it. And now here is the Reverend Jackson finally giving his position on the Latrell Sprewell situation.
Well, my point is, I think that the racial flames were blown all out of proportion, that this player was out of control. His coach and should not have done that. And I think that David Stern's quick reaction was more about putting down a league that's getting out of hand.
Reverend Jackson flirting with the truth. I'm a little stunned here, ladies and gentlemen, but there he was, flirting with the truth. He'll issue a clarification on that once he hears from his buddies. Let's grab some phones. We'll start in Metuchen, New Jersey with Gus. Welcome, sir. Nice to have you with us.
Hi, Rush. How you doing? Mega Dittos from Metuchen, New Jersey.
Thank you.
I think that the Bill Lan Lee appointment process should have went through the Senate and not just through Bill Clinton, and I think Bill Clinton has no character for doing this.
It wasn't going to go through the Senate.
It should have. It should have went through the Congress or the Senate, though.
But it wasn't going to.
I know.
But Bill Clinton had nothing to do with that.
I know. But it's a shame, though. I think it should go through the normal appointment process.
Well, it did. I mean, this is not new. There's a guy, there's a black, in fact, there was Bush, Reagan, one of the two appointed a guy named Bill Lucas to the same position, a black guy, to head up the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, and in the Judiciary Committee, the vote was 9-9, dead, sayonara, see you later. No full consideration by the United States Senate. That's what a 9-9 vote, or a tie vote, in whatever the numbers are, mean. And on this case, the president he's got the right to defy and make a recess appointment, which is good for 1998. It'd be good until the new Congress is seated and sworn in January of 1999. Mahona in Oklahoma City, welcome to the program.
Hi, Rush.
Hi.
Merry Christmas. It's Mahana, by the way.
I'm sorry. Thanks
That's
very
okay.
much.
That's
Welcome.
okay. Well, I fired off a mad email to Cokie Roberts yesterday after I heard her remarks. You know, it's just so typical. She can't see over what I drive. And I'm a little bitty grandmother with, you know, all my kids and gardening supplies around in my Tahoe. But she wants to tell me, you know, she drives what she wants to drive because she has the reasons that she has for driving it.
So
and that's okay.
She wants to drive something small so she can park easily.
So she can get around. But she can't see over me. So, but I can't drive what I want to drive because I have reasons for driving what I drive.
Well, I have to tell you something. I understand her complaint, to tell you the truth. Not that I would deny an SUV driver the right to drive. Not that even I wouldn't even think of it. I wouldn't even think of denying somebody the right to drive an SUV who wants to drive one. But I will admit it bothers me, especially if they're poking along and you want to get around them and you can't see well enough to get around them because you don't know what's in front of them. So then you're just lagging along, poking along and all that. I get very frustrated at that too. But there is, my friends, as we always try to do here, we focus on the larger point. And the larger point is this. Back in June, or sometime this summer, the president of the Sierra Club announced that SUVs were in his crosshairs, that we had to get rid of them. For the first reason was that they're polluting. They, therefore, are killing more children by polluting the air. Their emission standards are not nearly what cars are. And they are contributing to global warming. Because of the death that they were causing children, this man from the Sierra Club said that the SUV is the auto industry equivalent of Joe Camel. At that point, I read the story. We laughed about it. We had a lot of fun here. But I told you this is the opening shot. You think this is a nutcase and a wacko, and it's going to blow over, go away because nobody's going to take it seriously? I said, don't think that. They're coming after him. And one of the reasons they're coming after him is because a lot of people have them and they are a sign of some affluence, and a lot of people like them. And there are just too many liberals in this country who cannot stand people having a good time. The next step in the evolution of the anti-SUV movement was for Sierra Club-related organizations, health, safety organizations, to then offer the opinion that it was unfair for some to drive SUVs and others not to, because in a two-car accident where one of the vehicles is an SUV, the occupants of the SUV are more likely to survive and are more likely to experience fewer injuries than people who are not in their SUVs. And so it's unfair argument arose. And as liberals always do, rather than try to make things better by raising those at the lower end, they want to punish those at the upper end. They did not suggest that, well, hell, if these things are safe, we ought to put as many people in them as possible. No, what they suggested was, let's get the people in these SUVs out of them so they are as vulnerable to accidents as people who are not driving them. If we're going to have death in small cars, we're going to have death. We're going to have equal death. We got to have equal injury. And people laughed and people chuckled. But old El Rushbaugh was sitting here warning you that this is the next step. Now, it's gotten to the point where on the NBC Nightly News, these SUVs are responsible for polluting Los Angeles. They're responsible for all sorts of horrible things. SUVs occupy a considerable amount of time on the This Week roundtable yesterday. This thing's picking up steam in the mainstream press, which looks at everywhere else in the mainstream press, finds out what they're talking about, and emulates it. And so it's become a cause celeb now. And it's an attack on people who drive these things. Not just an attack on the SUVs, but an attack on the people who drive them. Now, the interesting thing to me is that far from being the choice of macho men, SUVs are craved by women, as I said only moments ago, particularly petite women who love finally being able to sit high up in the cab and look out over everything and be able to see everything and feel powerful and on top of everything rather than being sandwiched in with the feeling that they're being surrounded by semis. So it's not a macho thing, but the point is that a vehicle of choice for millions and millions, I mean, my friends, you know something. When Lincoln comes out with their version of one, when Mercedes comes out with their version of, by the way, you can't get a Mercedes. You know those things have a 2-year backlog? Here's a Mercedes, and you talk about safe. The Mercedes, according to reviews I've read, is supposedly the safest SUV on the road. It's got the best suspension system, the best braking system, the best traction system. It's got a lot of the things that have been incorporated into the general line of Mercedes, and they're only charging in the $35,000 range for this thing, which is why everybody wants one, because finally a Mercedes, a top-of-the-line Mercedes doesn't cost $80,000 to $140,000. It costs $35,000 or $40,000, right in the range of most other SUVs. Mercedes has to price it there to make it competitive. And look, they can't make them fast enough. And guess where they're made? You know where these things are made? They're made Alabama. Exactly right. They're made right here in the United States of America. And people can't get enough of them. But this is not to slight any of the others. But you know that when luxury manufacturers like Mercedes and Lincoln, and I hear that Cadillac now is toying around with the idea. Cadillac's announced, well, I'm going to tell you something, folks. When that happens, this is mainstream stuff. This is not a fad. This is not something that's. This is the auto industry following the market finally. And lo and behold, here come the environmentalist wackos and all the elitists who want to now criticize the vehicles themselves and the people who drive them. And the larger point here is that it is basically an attack on two things. It's an attack on your freedom, and it is an attack on your judgment. Your judgment is poor. You're putting other drivers who don't have the means to acquire an SUV at risk. You are unfair. It's so quintessentially liberal. That's the larger point here. Don't forget that. We'll take a break here. Be back with more in just a moment.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Steamroller will be in concert tomorrow night at the Nassau Coliseum out on Long Island. Now, speaking of women wanting to be like men, and by the way, I don't mean this as an insult. Somebody's going to take it that way, but I think women high in the cab of an SUV wanting to feel big and strong and powerful, that's what half the allure of these SUVs is. This is not a criticism, by the way. But let's face facts. Let's speak openly and honestly about it. Women don't like being smaller than men in the first place. Most of them don't. They don't like being, they don't like being weaker than men physically, in most cases. And being in the cab of an SUV, the higher the better, sort of equalizes the process or the situation. I know this because I've heard it from their lips. So in that vein, I have a story here out of Philadelphia with more scholarships available and even pro careers opening up for female athletes. High school girls are venturing into dangerous territory once thought reserved for boys. Anabolic steroid use. A new Penn State University study indicates that as many as 175,000 high school girls have used steroids. Some take the drugs to become leaner. Others use them to build more muscle. There are popular assumptions out there that boys want to build a muscle and therefore take steroids, and that girls want to get lighter and so have an anorexia problem or an eating disorder, said Donna Lopiano, executive director of the Women's Sports Foundation. But it's not that simple, she says. So, get this. Here's James Puffer, a professor of family medicine, UCLA. He says, as a society, we place terribly unrealistic expectations on kids, not only on how they should perform and how important winning is, but we also put incredibly unrealistic expectations about the way they should look. So competition is to blame, along with a little vanity. Girls wanting to be like boys, taking steroids or steroids. The correct pronunciation goes. Now, is there a correlation here between that and the desirability of an SUV? You be the judge. We'll take a break. Be back shortly with more in a moment, my friends. Stay with us.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
No less an expert than my own lovely and gracious wife, Marta, just called me during the brief timeout. She said, honey, you are exactly right about this SUV thing. God realizes he made a mistake making women smaller, weaker than men, and the SUV is his way of equalizing it. The SUV is God's apology to women. Is you put a woman in a 5,000-pound SUV and a man in a 5,000-pound SUV, everything's equal. It comes down then to who is the better driver, and as she says, everybody knows that's women. I, of course, at that point said, yes, sweetie, thanks, and you're exactly right, because I learned from Charlton Heston, and we bid each other goodbyes. I wanted to pass that on to you. So there you have it, my friends, the SUV, God's apology to women, God's equalizer. Peter in Siskiyou, Washington. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Welcome to the program.
Yes, sir. Merry Christmas, Rush, and the way it will be dittos.
Thank you.
Hey, this is good news because the Sierra Club's contributors and members, most of these people drive these cars. This used to be a mainstream conservation bunch. Now the radical elements have taken over. Liberalism has destroyed the cities. People are bailing out of the cities like mad. What gets them out into the countryside so they can live is SUVs.
And it gets them into the backyards of the environmentalist wackos who thought they had the wilderness all to themselves. That's exactly right.
This is the biggest growing market share. Sierra Club is really quite anti-capitalist, and this can only be good news for the rest of us, because the more we get into the mainstream and people realize just what these people are up to, they don't want people in the countryside, Rush. And how do you get people out of the countryside? You get them out of their cars. And this is the way to do it. I mean, how did they open up Aspen or anything else? It's with SUVs. It just drives them crazy. So they're really treading a fine line here.
You're exactly right. In fact, have you read Al Gore's book, Earth in the Lurch?
Well, I did, and I shipped the Honda over for a couple thermonuclear devices because I thought those were the danger, but he said the automobile was, so I got rid of my car, and now I got a couple bombs sitting in the driveway.
The reason I mention it to you is because if you read his book carefully, and I didn't have to read it all that carefully, you will come across passages where he indicates that he thinks that Americans are too mobile, that it's too easy to get around, that most people ought to be staying closer to home. George Will had a great line yesterday. He said the biggest problem liberals have with SUVs and the automobile in general is that too many people are driving around unsupervised by liberals. If they're kept at home, if they're kept in their communities, liberals can more easily supervise them and make sure that they won't do anything that's injurious or harmful to the rest of the world. And he's right. He's making a good, humorous point, but he's right.